Cumorah, Where the Nephites Landed, Volume 3, Nephite Fortifications. Copyright 1996, all rights reserved. Unauthorized copying is prohibited and dishonest. In Volume 1 of this series, we showed that North America is the Promised Land. We viewed some of the burial mounds and evidences of fortifications left by the Nephites. In Volume 2, we proved the geography of the Book of Mormon. In this volume, Volume 3, we will discuss the Nephite fortifications, burial pits, and mounds in depth. In Alma, chapter 49 and 50, we are given the manner in which the Nephites fortified their cities and strongholds against the Lamanites. It is reasonable to believe that from that time forth, because of the success of those defenses, it would become a lasting pattern to be followed by future generations of Nephites. We are told in Alma that Captain Moroni had the people dig a ditch or moat around their cities, and the earth that came from the ditches he heaped up inside of the ditches to make a wall of defense. On the top of those walls they were to build a wall of timbers to at least the height of a man, much as the U.S. Army did during the Indian Wars in the 17 and 1800s. At the top of the timbers they were to place pickets, making it almost impossible for an enemy to enter. At the entrances there would have to be other types of defenses used in place of the ditch. From the Book of Mormon we learn that the Nephites were generally farmers. They lived and farmed land near and around cities. Because the Lord gave to the Nephites a strict commandment to never become the aggressor, meaning the Nephites were only to defend themselves, the Lamanites were the aggressors and thus needed no defenses. From this we can conclude that the fortifications that were built and still exist were built by the Nephites for their own protection. Now, before we go to our pictorial study, let us look at some of the Nephite cities and fortifications that were surveyed and drawn up by E.G. Squire and E.H. Davis in the early to middle 1800s. Their work traced a diagonal line of fortifications and cities across the continent, beginning in southern Illinois, through south central and northern Ohio, into and ending in western New York, which is the area of the Drumlin Hills, Cumorah being the largest. There are large enclosures which must have served as fortified cities, smaller fortified enclosures for temporary protection, then hilltop fortifications which were not towns or cities, but strong forts exclusively built for protracted battles or for the defense of a migratory people fleeing from a strong enemy. We will study some of these, and you can compare them to the instructions given in Captain Moroni's methods of defense. The first of our comparisons lay in Ross County, Ohio, and must have been a fortified city. It enclosed a total of 127 acres. The main enclosure of 111 acres had 6 gates. The northeast corner of the enclosure had walls of approximately 20 feet in height. The moat or ditch was on the outside of the walls. The moat or ditch is represented by the wide black line. It was approximately 8 feet deep at the time of survey and was partially filled by the work of 1,400 years of erosion. Along the wall going west were 2 gates, at which there was no moat or ditch. The northwest corner of the enclosure slowly curves around the moat and holds a small artificial stream. And finally a copious spring together with a gateway to the west. At that point the moat ends. South of the gateway no moat was needed because of the channel cut by the spring. From the southwest corner and running east, there was a 30-degree slope at the foot of the wall which precluded the need for a moat. The builders took advantage of every natural defense. The south wall had 2 gates. At the southeast corner and going north, a moat was again necessary along the wall. A gateway without moat led to the east into a 16-acre enclosure. This enclosure had lower walls without moats, and had 5 gates, 3 of which were guarded with earthen platforms for towers. Many of the larger cities had appurtenant enclosures without moats. The defenses must have been sufficient for their use. Now picture a wall of timbers with pickets around the total enclosures, and you will see a well-defended city matching Moroni's instructions closely. Within the main enclosure were 2 smaller enclosures. The smaller one without moat had only 1 opening. The larger half-round one had 3 natural hills and 4 mounds within the embankment and moat. One cannot be sure as to just what these enclosures were used for. There were a total of 16 mounds within the main enclosure. Our second works lay in Butler County, Ohio, along the Great Miami River. It consisted of 95 acres. Its walls were approximately 12 feet high, and the outside moat had been 10 feet deep at the time of construction. It had 7 gates. The northwest side of the city either had a wooden wall along it, or the earthen wall had been destroyed by erosion. Notice the cross-section of the wall and moat at the time of survey. 1,400 years of erosion had filled the moat with 5 feet of soil. Our next work lay in Genesee County, New York, on the banks of Dry Brook. It consisted of approximately 8 acres. At survey, its walls were 4 feet high, and the outside moat was 4 feet deep. It had 5 gates and a broad opening facing the bank of the brook. One can only surmise that it had a wooden wall at that point. Our next works is in Ross County, Ohio, near the village of Bourneville, which is approximately 12 miles west of Chillicothe, Ohio. It lay at the top of a hill 400 feet above the valley floor. It was the largest stone fort built in that area and measured 2 1/4 miles in circumference. It enclosed over 140 acres and had 1 large pond in the center. It had rock walls with no earth fill mixed in. The walls were 8 feet in height and 8 feet in width at the base. It had 6 gates, 3 of which were at its south end and were of an unusual configuration. One can see that anyone entering could be accosted from both right and left at the same time. Because of the burnt rock at the 3 main gates, and also at many places along the walls, one must believe that it did have a timbered wall above the stone level, and that timbered wall had been burned. No sign of mortar was found among the stones, so the timbered wall must have been built first, and the rocks placed against it both inside and out. The burning of the rocks lends credence to the belief that the fort must have fallen to the Lamanites during a siege, although some spots near the gates show evidence of lengthy burning, possibly as signal fireplaces. Within 5 miles distance were 3 other great earthworks which are evidence of a large population in the area. Now to our pictorial study. You are now viewing the survey drawing of the Newark Works in Newark, Ohio. At the time of survey in 1847, it consisted of approximately 6 square miles. There are only 2 portions left today, the Circle Works and the Great Octagon with Circle Works. They are approximately 2 miles apart. We will examine the Circle Works first, beginning at its single opening, which measures 225 feet from center of wall to center of wall. The moat is inside of the walls and begins on each side at the opening. The grassy area between the moat at opening was the path leading through the gateway to the inside. This view was taken from the left side of the opening and atop the wall. This view was taken from the right side of the opening and atop the wall. This Circle Works was 1,200 feet by 1,150 feet in diameter from center line of wall to center line of wall.